In an age where needless complexity and tacked-on features have arguably become the status quo of AAA game design, it warms my heart to see some indie devs totally miss that memo. As somebody who doesn't always want to see complex skill trees and convoluted control schemes in every game I play, I respect the heck out of any developer that favors mechanical elegance above all else. One Button Bosses, a boss rush bullet hell title with a name as literal as they come, doesn't so much trim the proverbial fat off traditional design as slightly redefines it to be playable with a single finger. But does it succeed in its mission to be simple without being simplistic? Let's find out. Real quick though, let's also mention it's worth liking and subscribing if you enjoy our indie gaming coverage, and also worth checking out our Patreon to get cool perks and access to our fantastic Discord community. And if live streams are more your speed, we stream the latest and greatest indies every Tuesday and Thursday, and would love to have you join us either here on YouTube or over on our Twitch channel. But let's get back to One Button Bosses, a game I've been tremendously looking forward to ever since playing its Steam Next Fest demo. As I mentioned before, its title can be taken at face value. This entire game is played with one button, not even a joystick to move, just one button. It's an arcade style shooter where you don't control the shooting, and a movement focused bullet hell where control of your movement is severely restricted. On paper, that may be the sales pitch equivalent of offering you a cheeseburger pre-chewed and pre-digested to ensure you do as little work as possible, but in execution, it couldn't be further from the truth. Each of One Button Boss's 50 bespoke levels places you on a predetermined path around a big baddie. Movement and shooting are automatic, and player intervention comes in the form of the almighty, all-powerful single button, whose function changes depending on what movement style you're playing with. At the start, your only option is one called Turn. Activating it will instantly switch your direction from clockwise to counterclockwise or vice versa, which you'll need to do plenty of in order to dodge the game's eclectic variety of obstacles. But make no mistake, not only is this nowhere near as easy as it sounds, but its version of risk and reward demand you press that button only when you absolutely need to, because the longer you move in one direction and wait to turn away from the deadly obstacle, the faster you go, the faster you deal damage, and the less time you need to spend trying to stay alive. To succeed in One Button Bosses, it requires you know that flying too close to the sun is not just a half-hearted recommendation, but an enthusiastic demand. While the turn ability and pellet-like bullets are your default loadout, unlockables running the gamut from new color schemes for the game to new weapons and abilities come in the form of what One Button Bosses calls the grind, a totally linear skill tree you automatically progress through as you make your way through its levels. Some of these unlockables can be really useful, like the dash ability that doesn't let you change directions, but gives you a limited energy invincible dash, or the laser weapon that fires a progressively more powerful beam of energy as you grab power-ups along the track. Many of the game's tougher levels, occasionally brutally tough ones, benefit greatly from experimentation as you try different loadouts that may totally shift your chances of success. Sadly though, while many combinations of these loadouts exist, they are far from created equal, with a total inconsistency of usefulness that makes certain unlockables almost pointless for how needlessly clunky they make the combat. The pickup weapon, for example, exchanges the game's default bullets for a single more powerful projectile that works like a really crappy boomerang, flinging itself at your enemy and then ricocheting off it, requiring you to pick it up somewhere on your path back around before using it again. This is fine for early levels where the game does little to test your limits, but later battles have so much going on that worrying about picking up your weapon before you can use it again feels more like a distraction than a viable tactic. While the variety of useful loadouts thus becomes pretty small, there's no denying that the core gameplay accomplishes every bit of the frantic chaos it sets out to. Anybody who's played a game like Flat Heroes or just Shapes and Beats will be right at home with what One Button Bosses demands of you. This game is hard, and the sweat on my controller after dozens of attempts trying to beat an especially nasty boss is a testament to that. There are times when it gets a little too hard, even with no options to change the difficulty and thus little recourse for those who see it as too much, and you'll find out the hard way that some loadouts are literally impossible to use in certain levels without getting totally backed into a corner at times with no way to avoid being hit. It's a level of trial and error that's not as frustrating as it sounds when each level only lasts about a minute, but irked me a bit nevertheless. As a silver lining into some of these harder levels, it is worth mentioning that One Button Boss's major encounters, which I'd call boss fights if the game wasn't literally all boss fights, have pieces that can be thankfully skipped. When facing these tougher battles, they're broken up into several levels where you'll eke past by merely finishing a simple majority of them. 3 out of 5 or 6 out of 11, for example. This made the few levels that royally wrecked me a less bitter pill to swallow through its 4-ish hour campaign. It's worth mentioning that there is a story to follow here, one where each level pushes you up the ranks of a typical soul-sucking corporation, full of the sort of vapid corporate speak and jaded employees that one might come to expect. It's fine, I guess, certainly not bad, but maybe a bit too on the nose to be worth more than a mental chuckle here or there. Having a boss say something like, "I've seen many futures and none contain a normalized wage gap," is silly, but about as subtle as Quentin Tarantino's foot fetish. And while it's decent to follow along with, an abundance of unnecessary dialogue seemed aimed at testing my patience sometimes, though, in fairness, for corporate speak, that's pretty on brand. Where One Button Bosses faltered more for me was overall longevity. I was starting to tire out near the end of the campaign, and while the bonus of an entire roguelike mode adds an interesting twist, in practice it has enough problems to be more of an occasional distraction and less of a core selling point of the game. Don't get me wrong though, it's surprisingly robust. Each run will have you moving through 5 floors of battling, each of which consists of a Slay the Spire-like sprawl of nodes you must complete to move on. There's not a lot of variety in these nodes, with them mostly being comprised of enemies plus the occasional shop or rest point, but the progression feels unique enough from the main campaign to differentiate itself. Each completed level grants you a gift like a larger pool of energy for your dash or more damaging bullets, but most of these felt more like incremental stat boosts than game-changing synergies, and choices would sometimes be pointlessly obvious. Like the time I was handed the option of both an energy is moderately increased card and an energy is substantially increased card, as if there's any reason I'd choose the former over the latter. These are pretty minor gripes, but the biggest is that the difficulty curve just seems way off. Some levels will be so pointlessly easy that obstacles would appear in areas of the screen that don't even cross over your totally linear path, and others would throw so much at you that getting hit felt impossible to avoid. And given that doing so could end your whole run in pretty short time, I lost interest in the roguelike mode before long. Visually, One Button Bosses is simple looking, but the unlockable color palettes add enough variety to mix things up whenever you feel like it. It runs fantastically on the Steam Deck too, which is where I played it the most. Its music is a really fun mix of energetic electronica as well, which won't be to everyone's taste, but hey, I really liked it. All in all, I think One Button Bosses succeeded in giving me a really fun time with what I imagine is the simplest possible control scheme, and it's hard to deny how into it I was when it was really handing me my ass. But it's a shame so many of its features feel non-essential at best and clumsily implemented at worst, like its less useful weapons and the forgettable roguelike mode. Those looking for a tough, frantic arcade game to spend a few hours with are definitely in for a good time though, so I'm awarding One Button Bosses the Bronze Genie Lamp of approval.